Hi, welcome. Okay, I think we have both Facebook and Instagram. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Technology is a beautiful thing, but it is sometimes a tricky thing. So thank you for those first few minutes of us being able to kind of figure it out, but we are live and we're ready to rock and roll in both areas. So for those who are just joining, welcome. Hi, Facebook family. We have some just truly amazing Facebook friends that have been supporting us since the very beginning. So welcome to those friends. And just a brief kind of intro to get Christine on here is that we know that your grief doesn't take time off. We know that during COVID-19 that you don't get to hit pause on some of the feelings that you're going through right now. And we know that we had to cancel a couple of our Grieving Hearts due to all that's going on in the world. So this was our way to connect to you, and certainly for Families First to connect you to Christine. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Christine. She has over 20 years of experience serving families in our community. We have been working closely for the last several years, and even through this difficult time where maybe she's physically unable to see families in the office, she is meeting them where they are. She is meeting them via phone, via Skype, whatever is needed to serve those families in our community. I know for me personally, she has always offered support in times of stress, in times of grief, and as a community, even if you haven't experienced a death recently, we are grieving. So without further ado this evening, I'd like to welcome our colleague and dear friend, Christine McMillan, who is certainly going to be able to give us just some positive words that we need during this very difficult time. So thank you. Christine and I are practicing physical distancing, so just give us 2 seconds to switch places here. And thank you again so much for joining us. Families First is proud to be able to meet you wherever we can during this difficult time. Thank you, guys, and please enjoy and take Christine's words. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jen. I certainly appreciate that introduction. I am Christine McMillan, and I'm here to talk to you about how to meet your grief needs during this very stressful time. I'd like to welcome you to Grieving Hearts first get together. Like so many things, activities in our community, we've had to adjust and adapt to the pandemic restrictions. And so I'm very grateful to Families First, allowing me to continue to bring the Grieving Hearts program to your home. So instead of you coming and seeing me at the Signature Tribute Center, I'm coming into your home. So thank you for inviting me and inviting us. So I would invite you to get comfortable as we shelter in place together. Perhaps you can gather with loved ones, and if you are grieving because the death of a loved one whom you would normally gather with, perhaps you have a picture of them. Perhaps you can envelop yourself in one of their articles of clothing so you can feel supported and loved. I invite you to bring your questions forward throughout the time we spend together, and I'll try to get to them as soon as I possibly can. This is the first time that I am doing this virtually, so I will be looking back and forth. I'll be looking at my notes, and I trust that you will be kind to me. So, as Jen said, grief, like the seasons, it doesn't pause. We can't stop it like many of our other activities. It will continue to unfold because it needs to be addressed and it needs to be processed. But we're here to talk about how your grief is going to be greatly impacted by the restrictions in place. And this will put additional strain on meeting your grief needs. But I urge you not to put your grief aside. I urge you to continue to find a space for your grief while we're going through this stressful time. So I'd like to start with a story. I'd like you to imagine a family living halfway across the globe. And this is a fairly typical family, and this family has 2 parents and 3 school-aged children. And this family functions really well. They are engaged in school activities, in leisure activities, in their community. However, one of these parents has an underlying medical condition. But it's being managed well. But this parent is also grieving because their mother died. And this person's widowed father lives in another city. They have loving relationships with their extended families. And then an event occurs. And an event that doesn't necessarily affect them at the onset. And life continues normally. As time progresses, they're advised to take certain precautions. Activities involving larger groups are canceled, including school. Now you've got the 3 children learning from home. Leisure activities are stopped. And then work from stay-at-home initiatives are implemented. Livelihoods now are being threatened, and this family of 5 is now living in close quarters. Their life, their normal life, slowly comes to a standstill. But they manage to cope in the initial stages. But as the honeymoon period starts to wear off, we see that the parents start to struggle with the stress of being at home, the financial burdens. Their stress affects their relationship, which in turn affects their children's. And that's seen in their behavior. The grieving person in the household then feels even more lost, disoriented in their grief. They don't have any personal connections with their support system, either professionally or personally. Life at this moment, as they know it, has stopped. It's been taken away from them. And then as time goes on, the restrictions are in place for a longer period of time. And they become a little more stringent. And this family starts to see that this event is more like a marathon and not a sprint, as they had once hoped. They become more disillusioned, frustrated, more out of control, and the stress increases. Wouldn't you say that grief is very much like that? We believe, or we would prefer to believe, that it's more like a sprint. And of course, our culture feeds that message. We want it done today, and we want it over with. We want to press that fast forward button of our life because we're uncomfortable and we're in pain. And when we feel deprived of anything, or more importantly, anyone who brings meaning into our lives, we grieve. So as Jen was saying in her introduction, we're all grieving. But those of you out there who have connected with us via Instagram and Facebook, I would presume have done so because they're grieving an actual loss because of a death of a loved one. And so we recognize that your grief is going to be impacted by the grief we're all experiencing right now. So what is this we're feeling? What is this? What is grief? Well, it's a simple 5-letter word for a very natural response we have after being deprived of something or someone that is meaningful in our lives. And we know, and I'm sure many of you out there have come to our presentations in the past, that grief affects us on 5 realms: emotionally, physically, socially, cognitively, as well as spiritually. And this pandemic of grief that we're all experiencing also affects us on all these 5 realms. So emotionally, you may be very concerned about your health, the health of your partner, your loved ones near, your loved ones far. You might be concerned about the people in your life and their moods and how they're dealing with it. Perhaps they have some emotional issues that they are coping with as well. You might become irritable. Surprise, surprise, under these conditions, quick to anger. You may fear more financial insecurity, and certainly perhaps anxiety over what the future holds. Physically, have you experienced any sleep disturbances or appetite changes? Many of my clients say that they certainly experience emotional eating, right? That's not unusual. Do you have a lack of energy and motivation right now? Or maybe you have pent-up energy. At this moment, are you holding any tightness in your body? Do a body scan right now. Check your jaw, your shoulders, your chest. Is there any tightness? So take a moment if you feel that tightness and breathe through it. Keep breathing through it. Socially, well, obviously there's a lack of personal contact. We feel disconnected from others. Cognitively, well, we're out of our routines for the most part. This can leave us feeling extremely disoriented. We may find it difficult to string tasks together, let alone multitask. We may become forgetful. I've been working out of my home. What day is it today? I've lost track. We may have difficulty establishing a new routine. Spiritually, and I'm not talking necessarily from a religious perspective, but you may start to question, why is this happening? How is this happening? In addition to your grief. Are you taking this personally? Do you feel that it's another assault on your grief when you're trying to grieve and to breathe through a day after the death of someone that you love? Are you questioning the fairness of all of this? Does any of this sound familiar? Right? Everything is up when it should be down, and down when it should be up. We wake up every morning and the world is different. We don't know what to expect. We become more confused and scattered and frightened. And we're trying to find a new normal. Well, at least with the virus still threatening, it's a temporary new normal. However, with grief, you're struggling to find your permanent new normal. And this is an additional stressor because you still have the job of grieving and mourning your loved one. Now, we know that the death of a loved one is a number 1 stressor. It's rated number 1 on a lot of stress scales. So what is that? A stressor is anything in our environment. It's an agent that causes us to have a stress reaction. Stress, or more specifically distress, is the feeling we experience when we are under pressure. And I want to add, under pressure, and believe we don't have the capacity to cope with what we're facing. Basically, it's our bodies, our minds, our souls, our spirits' response to that stressor or to that threat. Now, in normal circumstances, our stressors are fairly benign. In this case, the threat is real to our well-being, to our lives, and to the well-being and lives of our loved ones. But how we experience and interpret that stressor is another huge component and a very important component of how we experience the stress. So that's our internal perception. So, presuming all of us are doing what we can control right now, which is being diligent about our hand washing, physical distancing, stay at home, work from home. If we're doing all of that to hopefully get on top of this and eventually stop spreading the virus, what else is in our control as we kind of move forward in this event that really is bigger than us, but we can still have some control? In grief, the question why always precedes the how. Why did this happen? And how can I get through it? Both are very appropriate. Certainly the why did this happen is very normal. But the how is actually more important because that gives us back some control. So the same applies to the next several weeks of abiding by these limitations. How are you going to cope with these restrictions as well as continue to get your grief needs met? So, what are some of the controlling or controllable things in this process? Well, the very first thing is acknowledging that what you are feeling is very normal. There's nothing abnormal about fear, frustration, feeling of loss. And in this case, the threat, unfortunately, is a threat to our physical being. In grief, it feels like the threat is we're threatened by physically, but it really is an emotional threat that we feel. But in this case, it's a real physical threat. So the main thing is acknowledge your feelings and continue to find a place for your grief by mourning. So what does that mean? Well, mourning is how I take these feelings that I'm feeling, distress, anger, fear, anxiety, and we bring it outside of ourselves. What we call is we externalize it so that it doesn't stay trapped inside of us and cause more problems. So, number one is you need to continue to mourn, to express your pain and your sadness, not only for your loved one, but generally speaking, the pain and sadness and distress that is coming from this pandemic of grief. The next thing is that you can actually physically look after yourself. We hope that you are all following the physical recommendations. You need to respect your body's needs during this extraordinary time. You need to establish a routine, even if you're working from home or staying at home. Establish a routine that you think you can stick to while you shelter at home. Try to go to sleep at the same time and wake up in the same time. Follow your almost normal morning routine. Excuse me, I'm just pressing the fast forward button here on my notes. Just stay with me. So we talked about a routine. So go to sleep at the same time, wake up at the same time, follow a morning hygiene routine. If you're working from home, still brush your teeth and do your hair, and at least put on a good top if you're doing any meetings virtually. Have a plan for the day, especially if you're sheltering at home with children. Find time to move. We're going to have pent-up energy. That's a really good way to deal with our stress, is to move. Find a way to get outdoors, preferably for at least 20 minutes a day. If you're not able to, or if the weather's not cooperating, there's lots of classes online. Perhaps you can try a YouTube Zumba class, or a yoga or Tai Chi class. Also respect your fatigue levels, because stress also tires us out. Rest when it's necessary. Eat healthy meals. So while we may be tempted to indulge, try to keep that to a minimum. It's very important that you keep your immune system up right now, given what we're facing. So take your vitamins, drink lots of water, refrain if possible from eating fatty, high processed, sugary and salty foods in high amounts. Monitor your alcohol or any other mood altering substances if possible. Practice deep breathing or meditation. It's proven to be so beneficial in lowering the autonomic fight or flight response, lowering our heart rate. And you know what? You can still connect to others, just like we're doing right now. I'm connecting with you. It's not the same, but it's a darn good substitute right now. Virtually, obviously, is the next best thing to being together personally. Maybe you can meet your friends for coffee or lunch online, virtually. Maybe you can still have your book club meeting. Pick up the phone. Call someone that you've been thinking about. Tell them that you're thinking about them. Reach out to your support system. As Jen had mentioned, I am still supporting people, clients. I'm giving them the option of telephone calls, emails, or a secured virtual platform. There's a learning curve involved, and it does alter the therapeutic relationship, but we certainly still need the support. And there are still professionals out there who have adapted how they provide services. Meet a friend, or maybe even a loved one if they're living in a different household, in a park, but practice your physical distancing. In this tough period of time when we're feeling that so much is being taken away on top of your loved one through death, I'd like you to consider starting a gratitude list. That helps balance the sad, negative thinking that could spiral. Put together a self-care kit, and that's going to look different. It's going to look different for everyone. Maybe you can start to list telephone numbers of people that you trust, that you rely on, that support you, that comfort you. Maybe your self-care kit includes a good book or an inspiring podcast. Soft blanket maybe, or maybe a favorite comfy article of clothing that belonged to your loved one. I always tell my clients that when they need a hug, when they miss a hug from their loved one, to get a piece to get an article of their loved one's clothing and wrap themselves up in it. Other things that are soothing and comforting are candles. I've got one right here. Okay? Fragrance. The sense of smell is very, very strong. It's a strong sense. And it is shown also to have a very calming effect. What about photo albums of loved ones? Now that might be painful and you might want to distance yourself. You might see that as a trigger. But maybe this is your opportunity to do some mourning as well. So pull out that photo album of your loved one. Spend time with your memories. Don't evade them. Another thing you can do, and I just found this out, is you can take a free virtual tour of world famous museums. Just type in free virtual tours. Maybe you're going to take a course online, learn a new language, pray, meditate, deep breathe, and practice mindfulness. And especially in grief, when our anxiety takes a hold of us and runs away with fears about the future, mindfulness is a wonderful technique for us to stay grounded. We only have this moment. We don't have tomorrow. And a fear is a feeling. And feelings aren't necessarily facts. You have a right to feel it, but it's not necessarily facts. But what mindfulness does is bring that mind that's running into the future back to what is. Take up crocheting, knitting, sewing, woodworking. These types of activities have been shown to calm and to regulate our emotions. Adjust your expectations of yourself. I say that so many times to my clients. Again, we're inundated with expectations from our hurry up and get well culture. You should be feeling more normal by now. You should be back to work. But adjust your expectations of yourself as we go through a really historical period in our lives. I'm sure many of us have not experienced anything like this. Limit your exposure to the news. We get news 24 hours, 7 days a week. We can become saturated and easily overwhelmed. So what I would recommend is finding reliable sources and limiting yourself to perhaps 2 or 3 times a day if you can. What about finding alone time? Seems counterintuitive, right? When we're talking about self-isolating and not being able to connect. But if you're sheltering in place with family members, you need and deserve your alone time, especially when you're grieving and mourning. So have a talk with your family members so that they don't take your alone time as personal. There are always going to also be people that are far more less fortunate than us. We are all in this together. There are going to be people who are having a more difficult time. Pick up the phone and call them. Tell them you're thinking about them. Spend time with them on the phone. I also want you to acknowledge the ways you're being resilient. You are getting through this, just like in grief. You're not comfortable. You're in emotional pain right now, but you are getting up and you're breathing and you're putting one foot in front of the other. Acknowledge your resiliencies. Uncover some strengths that you didn't realize you had. We don't normally grow emotionally and spiritually when times go well. We enjoy them, but we don't usually grow. These are the times that we grow. These are the times when we learn things about ourselves that we wouldn't necessarily have learned. And remember, the perception of how we're coping with this is going to affect our stress levels. So what can you do? Then do it. What can you control? Then put that into action. So while we cannot control many things right now, focus on what is within your control, starting with your perception. Remember, you are not stuck at home. You are actually safe at home. So I'm going to take some questions. Let me see. From Lisa. She talks about comfort food. We crave comfort food. Absolutely. Yeah, in periods of distress, we find some ways to feel comfortable, to remind us of those times, perhaps in childhood, where we were comforted and it made us feel good. Absolutely. You can indulge yourself, but still while keeping in mind that sometimes those comfort foods are high in salt and in fat. So again, temper it like you do with your grief. Respect your grief, be with your grief, and then put it down. So yeah, indulge in comfort food if it helps you get through the day. And Jackie recommends Marco Foods. There's a little plug there. And she says, I presume it's a she, great prepared meals and healthy. Yeah, if you don't want to cook, or if you can't organize yourself well enough to cook because you've got children underfoot, treat yourself if you're able to. Okay? Pat says, the videos make me cry, or they make me cry, especially the videos. I'm not really sure what you mean about that, Pat. So maybe you can send us another question. Are you talking about the videos of your loved one? Let's presume that's what you're talking about. Yeah, they're gonna make you cry. But that's how you do your mourning. That's how you get what's in here out of yourself. So I was doing a consult with a client yesterday, and this client said that he was avoiding thinking about his wife who recently died. And I asked him, why are you avoiding that? And he said, because it makes me sad. Yeah, the death of your loved one is going to make you sad. But you don't want the sad to stay in here. Because if the sad stays in here, you've got no place to put happy that's waiting for you down the road. So if you're talking about those videos, it's okay. Mourn it. Allow the videos to help you to mourn. But you might want to do it a little at a time. Okay? So pick up your grief, pick up your video, so to speak. Feel the feelings, cry, release, and then put it down. Okay? Jackie Davison, Jackie, she asked if I counsel teenage kids with loss. Most of my practice is actually directed towards adults, but I would encourage you to maybe give me a call or go on my website and send me an email. I'd like to know a little bit about how old the children are and some of the circumstances. And if I feel that I wouldn't be of service, then I would certainly make recommendations, because I do have a network of other practitioners in the community that I would feel comfortable sharing their names with you. Let me see. Holly says, I find that I am taking on grief of the world. And Hearing stories of loved ones who are dying alone brings it all back. So, I'm just going to press this.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
just
Okay,
press
I'm
them.
just going to press this. My technical
go.
person, Courtney. Okay, I'm going to read that again. I find that I am taking on the grief of the world. Hearing people who are dying alone brings back all the grief of the day I lost my mom. She died unexpectedly in the hospital. I wasn't there when she passed. Is this okay? Yeah. Absolutely. It's okay. Just as we relive and perhaps re-experience through our emotions and physically in our bodies happy memories, like that memory of the last vacation, we're also going to re-experience sad memories. So yeah, that's okay. So I would suggest that, Holly, I believe it was Holly, that you don't question yourself, you don't judge yourself. What you're really doing is you're relating to somebody else's pain. So find some ways that you can then constructively feel that feeling and mourn. Maybe you want to journal. Maybe you want to blog about it. But it's perfectly normal. With everyone self-isolating, Brianna says, is it normal to want to further self-isolate while having feelings of grief? It's a very good question. Yeah, maybe you're overwhelmed. Maybe there's absolutely too much coming at you right now. And that's understandable. Grief, as we all know, affects us on those 5 realms. And then the grief we're feeling because of some of our liberties taken away is also affecting us on these 5 realms. And so sometimes we need a timeout. It's okay, give yourself a timeout. But again, balance that with still being connected with others. However, through alternative ways or practicing physical distancing. Let's see, we got a question here. How do I support? No, I read that one.
Oh, did you?
Yep, I read that one. That's. How do I support someone who is grieving when I can't physically be there for them? That's good. Yeah, and that makes you feel even more useless, if I can use that term. Helpless is probably a better term. So you're gonna have to get creative. Can you pick up the phone? Can you FaceTime them? Can you email them? There is a family member, a cousin of mine, who lost her daughter to suicide almost a year ago, and she lives in Toronto, and I don't see her that often. But what I do is I send her grief thoughts, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. I'm thinking of you. What you're going through is normal. Reach out to me. So maybe you can do that. So many times we tend to forget about the bereaved after the funeral. We think we've done our part. We've paid our condolences. We've donated flowers, made a donation. And then we forget that life is forever changed for them. So this is the time. This is the time to reach out through alternative ways. They understand that you can't see them personally. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? Somebody wants to know how to deal with their anger. Well, anger usually comes as a result of feeling deprived of something that we believe or think that we're entitled to have. Again, it's a very normal reaction. We are being deprived on many, many realms. So the first thing would be, again, to acknowledge your anger. Think about how you have coped in a healthy way with your anger in the past, and then find ways to do that right now, and understand that it's going to be a little bit more intense right now because of this initial stressor. And if you're not having any success with some of your coping strategies, reach out to a professional. Okay? Get their opinion. Maybe sometimes even talking it out. As we say, getting it off our chest helps to diffuse some of those feelings. So I hope that answered your question. Let's see if there's anything else. How are we doing here?
I think we're good.
We're good? Okay. I see we've got lots of people with us, and I'm hoping that I am sharing with you important information or useful information that is going to help you to get through this extremely trying times. But I think I'd like to remind everybody that the grief over the death of your loved one is going to be compounded by this stress. But wouldn't you rather hope for that if you can mourn your loved one during these extraordinary circumstances, then you're only going to come out hopefully a better and a stronger and a more courageous person if you're able to do this. So while we may not be able to get physical support, we can provide and we can ask for other forms of support out there. Again, we need to be as creative as we can as we journey all of this together. So I'm just going to have a look here. And one of the things I did want to also talk about, and I see that somebody is kind of relating their question, I believe, to what I'm about to say, and that is, think about all those families right now. I think Jen talked about it, who aren't able to have a funeral ritual that they had hoped for their loved one. Imagine feeling the disconnection that they're going through right now. Because what we do need to do when we lose someone to death is we need the support from the community to get us through. Now, while we are living across the globe, family members be across the globe, we can still connect. But when we're not permitted, or we have to limit the people that can come into funeral homes to support us, that's another loss as well. And sometimes if you're experiencing this or have experienced it, it might feel that you haven't done enough for your loved one. And that's a very real feeling as well. Again, you might feel robbed of what most of us that have had funeral rituals before this time has been able to experience. So I'm very sorry for that. But I do know that funeral homes, and certainly Families First, are doing their very best to make sure that your grief needs during the funeral, a period where you're saying really your first goodbye, is being met. Let me see. Jeff says, my father is diagnosed with COVID-19. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that, Jeff. That must be extremely frightening for you right now. I hope that perhaps his symptoms are on the milder side, if they are, or even if they're not, how are you going to cope with this? How are you tackling this challenge right now? What is within your control? Well, literally, our hands are tied, or your hands are tied. Is he self-isolating? Is he in the same household as you are? Is he in hospital? So take stock of assess the situation, and then take stock of what can you do to continue to support him and to continue to meet your needs, in terms of your feelings, in terms of your fears, as you move forward. And I would prefer if you try not to be brave. I hear that a lot from my clients, that they minimize or control their very normal grief responses because they don't want to make others feel sad or upset. But I think it's in our collective vulnerabilities that we actually show our courage and our strength. We're not human if we don't experience all the emotions on the spectrum. Yes, well, we would like to be on one end of the spectrum that perhaps are more comfortable in positive feelings. To be fully human is to accept that we will be anywhere on the continuum, from joy to fear, to anxiety, to happiness, at any point in our lives. And yes, some events, like COVID virus, our loved ones getting ill, our loved ones dying, are not comfortable, are painful. But to deny that is to deny your authentic self. So, Jeff, I wish you and your family, and certainly your father, the very best, and try to understand what it is that you can do and adapt what is within your control. Putting our heads in the sand, turning the other way, denying what is, doesn't make it go away. And with grief, I can almost guarantee you it's going to follow you, and it's going to continually try to get your attention, emotionally, physically, spiritually, until you stop and turn around and face it. So the courage comes with facing what we fear, not with not having the fear, but acknowledging and facing the fear. Jackie says, thank you for taking this time out to talk with us. Oh, you're most welcome. As Jen had said, we've been doing Grieving Hearts for how long now, Courtney? I don't know, maybe three or four years. And and I applaud Families First for offering this service to our community free of charge. That's wonderful. Many people are not able to either afford psychotherapy. Many people don't have benefits that cover psychotherapy services. So thank you again to Families First to continue to look after the bereavement needs of our community. And I am very honored and privileged to not only be walking alongside many of this community by offering grief support and bereavement support, but also with working alongside Families First. Let's see. We talked about comfort food. Let me see. Stephanie says, we are all nurses, paramedics, and firefighters in my family. Wow. I lost my dad a year ago next month. My mother is locked down in a long-term care facility, and she is deaf. I worry every day the lack of closure, if anything. I worry every day, and the lack of closure of anything that's happening, everything that's happening is really frightening. Wow, Stephanie, take a deep breath with me. And as you breathe out, I want you to release any of that tension, that fear that you have. I'm sorry that you have to go through this. First of all, are you a nurse or a paramedic? But you've certainly got them in your family, so your stress is going to probably be quite high, being concerned about their welfare, because they are really on the front lines. And then you should talk about your dad. So you're coming up on your 1-year anniversary next month. So in and of yourself, you are probably starting to anticipate next month. And your anxiety has probably been rising as you near this very important date. And then you're thrown in the middle of all of this. So I'm sorry you have to go through this. And then you say your mother, you don't have access to your mother. So what can you do? What's within your control right now? Can you deliver notes to her? Handmade, homemade cards? How are you going to handle your father's first year death anniversary? It's going to have to be different if you can't get together with loved ones and friends. You're going to have to become creative in that. But I urge you to still acknowledge that day, because it's an important day in your life. Understand what's within your control, what's not in your control. And then whatever you think is within your control, take a hold of it, grab it by the horns, and do what you need to do. And forgive yourself that it may not be the 1-year anniversary that you had hoped for, but that you did the very best under these circumstances. Stephanie says, thank you. And yes, I am a nurse, but her immune system is compromised. So she's sharing that she feels very guilty, the fact that she can't work. Wow. So that's something else that you're dealing with, Stephanie. Yeah. So guilt comes from a feeling that we have omitted something or done something that we should be doing. So in this case, you are at risk for going into work. So you haven't really omitted anything or done anything to cause actual guilt. Would you like to reframe that and perhaps think that you regret that you can't go into work? So alternatively, what are ways that you can do your part? Can you get online and start a blog from a medical professional's point of view? You don't know how maybe you can start a face group chat and share your knowledge and your skills that way. Tricia says, thank you, Christine, for doing this tonight. You are most welcome. These seminars through the grief process in the loss of my husband. My husband died. My husband passed away in December 2018. So you're most welcome, Tricia. I feel privileged to be able to have this form that Families First is providing me to get out the correct information out there about grief. my message to my clients always is that what you are feeling is normal, natural, and necessary. And when I'm able to do this, deliver this message to a wider audience, so to speak, I think more people are being helped, and it's a wonderful opportunity to dispel a lot of the myths that are out there about the grief process. So you are most welcome, Tricia. So Tricia says that her husband died in December 2018. So you, that's a year, just past a year for you. And I'm sure it's still difficult. And I'm sure you miss him terribly, especially right now. So what are ways that you can honor his memory? Maybe you can write him a love letter and tell him that you miss him. Interestingly enough, I had a client today who said to me that given all the stress that she is going through right now with the restrictions on because of the virus, there's a part of her who actually feels relieved that her loved one isn't here to experience it. And I thought that was quite insightful. Stephanie says, I guess your father's birthday is Sunday. I'm just spending time with my memories. That's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. The memories of our loved ones don't change. They are what they are. Our feelings towards the memories change and differ as our grief journey unfolds. So that picture perhaps that you have hanging on the wall, that at the beginning of your grief journey is a huge triggering event, don't take it down. Don't listen to your neighbors. Don't take it down. That picture, as you do the processing of your grief, as you mourn, as you have the courage to face that trigger, when you look at that picture, it becomes a sweet memory. So in the beginning, while we grieve and mourn their absence, as we process it, we then become grateful for their presence. So I wish you well on Sunday, and choose, Stephanie, whatever way feels most comfortable to you to mark his birthday. Sue says, thank you for this. Just lost my husband in the beginning of March. Oh, you are very early in the process, Sue. This is an extremely stressful time. And I appreciate any insight and help you can offer in my healing. Sue, the very first thing is to acknowledge that everything you are feeling, while it doesn't feel normal, is actually normal. There's a wide range of what's normal when you feel so abnormal, with the exception of causing harm to yourself or anyone else. But allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. Learn as much as you can about grief, Sue, from reliable sources. Okay? Saturate yourself with what's normal. Reach out to a professional person. But that's not always necessary either. Find out what you can about grief and understand that what you're going through is very normal. If we broke our leg, we wouldn't necessarily go to our doctor and complain that we're in pain. And yet we do that so many times when our hearts are broken. We wonder why we're feeling this way. A lot of my clients will say, I don't want to share my grief because I don't want to make other people sad. Or I don't want to ask for help. As long as we think something is not normal, we're going to try and resist it. And the more we resist our grief, we just had a technical glitch here. As long as we resist our grief, we give it more power to overcome us. So cultivate the patience, because this is not a sprint. Cultivate the patience for the process, and don't go against the natural unfoldings. Human beings naturally want to heal. But you have to understand that the pain that comes with death is part of this process, because you wouldn't be feeling it if you weren't attached in the first place. So I wish you the best, Sue. This is a rocky road, but you can get through it. Figure out what you can control, figure out the ways that are going to help you to mourn him, whatever feels comfortable: writing, talking, art, music, journaling, love letters. I had a client who put together a beautiful, beautiful printed memory photo album of her husband. And that's definitely a keepsake, and she sees that as a gift that she's given to his memory. Yeah, absolutely, it's still difficult. You won't hear me say that it's not difficult. It is difficult. But is it worth it? I had a client some time ago. This is a funny story. I believe that we also need to use humor. His wife had died, and I asked him, would he have given up his 40-odd years of being married to this lady if he knew that his heart would be broken, ripped out of his chest? Are you ready for this? He looked at me and he said, yes. So that's a little odd, I would say. I'm hoping that he didn't understand my question, because when I asked that question to other clients that have come since, most of the time through their tears they tell me, no, I wouldn't have given up my time with my loved one. And so this is the cost of loving. Okay? The cost of loving is your grief. Okay, so I've been asked to take one more question. Wow, this hour or so has gone fast, hasn't it? Sue says, sometimes I don't think I have really cried enough or grieved to what I need. So that's actually a very good question, and we're probably going to end on this, in that you don't necessarily have to cry in order to mourn. And I'm just going to clarify this. Grief is what we feel inside on the 5 realms: emotional, physical, spiritual, cognitive, and social. But mourning is how I get through it. That's where you've got the control. Now, you don't have to mourn. You don't have to cry, pardon me, in order to mourn. But you do have to find some form of expression of getting your grief feelings up and out. Maybe you write letters. Maybe you use art. Maybe you paint. Whatever it is. However, on the other hand, if you feel like your body naturally needs to heal and you can feel the tears welling up, but you repress them, that's a different story. And then you will have to sit down perhaps with a professional, or face your triggers, look at your triggers so that you do cry and release your tears. Okay? Holly says to Sue, yes, it comes in waves. Absolutely. Does not pat you on the shoulder and say, I'm coming to throw you off guard. It definitely comes in waves. So if there are no further questions, I think we're going to be wrapping up. So my message then to you is to continue to make room for your grief. You will have to find creative ways to meet your grief needs, but I urge you not to postpone it, not to put it aside, not to turn the other way, because it isn't going to go away. And really, your loved one deserves you to continue mourning. Okay? So reach out for help. We cannot do this together. We cannot do this alone. We need each other. We just have to find creative ways to do it together. And I'm going to end with a story or a passage. And this passage was written actually in a novel in February 2017, and I find it quite remarkable. It was penned by a Israeli author. And I'd like to end on that, and I wish you all the very best. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows. And the people began to think differently, and the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed. I wish you all the very best and reach out for support in creative ways. Take care, my friends.